what's the bottom line in the existing economic system? Because actually, it's not true. Whatever the bottom line is in this type of economic system, it isn't true. Because if you're degrading the life support systems of the earth, you're bankrupt from the word go.
Hello everybody, I'm Paul Beckwith with the Climate Emergency Forum, and with me I have John Liu, and John has been involved in setting up numerous eco-restoration camps, in fact 55 of them on 6 different continents. And John, I met at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, just a few weeks ago, and here we are right now in Montreal at the COP15, which is the conference on biodiversity. So we've got lots to talk about, and we can discuss what's been going on in terms of John's work at both the COP27 and the COP15 here. So I'll pass it over to you.
Well, thank you. It's nice to be here, Paul, and happy to answer any questions I can.
Okay, so I guess one of the things I'm really interested in is, how you got sort of started, because most of your work is in journalism and movies and so on. And when did you first get concerned about climate change? And, your concern for climate change led you into the eco-restoration ideas and movement.
I helped open the CBS News Bureau at the time of normalization of relations in Beijing in China. And then I worked with CBS News for about a decade. Following that, I worked with Radio Televisione Italiana and Zweites Deutsches Fernsehen, so Italian state television and then German state television. So that was about 17 years of time. Now I've been working on ecological things and environmental things for the last 30 years. So actually it's more leaning toward environment. The initial reason I got interested in the environment was because as China was rising through the industrial growth and more consumption and a lot of export industries, there was a lot of pollution. And my children were born in China, and I was living in China at the time, and I just felt really, at first I would look at the pollution and I would say somebody should really do something about the environment, but I meant somebody else because I was too busy going to my office and, I was a very important person, so on. And then I realized that was a very bad attitude. And I thought, well, if I were going to do something about the environment, what would I do? And what happened was I realized I work in media, so maybe I should do something with media to help the environment. And so I we created an organization called the Environmental Education Media Project for China. And then we took 1,000 films from Europe, mainly from the UK, to China, and translated them into Chinese and gave them to the state public broadcasting and to the university systems and to the environmental ministry to use all over China. And then I found out that there was an AIDS problem because the medical personnel were afraid of HIV and they didn't know anything about it. They just were ignorant. So I helped to create the China HIV/AIDS Information Network, which became the UN Information Center for HIV and AIDS in China. And then the BBC, when we took all these films to China, they said, well, will you make some films for us in China? And I said, okay. And then I went to our partner, the State Environmental Protection Administration, which later became the Ministry of Environment. And I said, I would like to use the library. And they said, we don't have one. And I couldn't, that did not compute. And then they said, can you build a library? And I said, yes. And so I built the China HIV/AIDS, no, beyond that, I built the China Environment and Sustainable Development Reference and Research Center. So at that point, I'd already built all these different organizations to do restoration and engaged so many people. And then the World Bank said, will you go out and document the restoration of the cradle of Chinese civilization in the upper and middle reaches of the Yellow River? And so when I did that, I compared what I was seeing in terms of the evolutionary succession and the amount of degradation that had been taking place over human history. And I said, well, that's way more important than the rise of China or the collapse of the Soviet Union or any of the other things that I've witnessed as a journalist. And that's determined what I did in the last 30 years.
That's quite a few different things that have been on your plate. So how long have you been working on the eco-restoration sites? I mean, I think Charles mentioned about 6 years or so, and this is like 55 different sites in 6 continents. So could you give us a few details about what's involved? Like, how big are these sites in area? How are they segregated from the well away from cities and things? Like, how connected are they to other parts of the countries that they're in? How many people are generally occupying them, and how does a person get involved if they wanted to, say, become a member and go to one of these sites for a period of time?
Well, I think I'd like to tell you a little bit more. So after I started to document the Lus Plateau in the upper and middle reaches of the Yellow River, which is the cradle of Chinese civilization, I found that it's possible to rehabilitate large-scale damaged ecosystems, including restoring hydrological function, restoring soil fertility, restoring the biomass and the biodiversity. And this includes over long historical periods and very, very large areas. So when I learned this, I felt like this has to be communicated. It's a responsibility. It's not a job. And so I just took this on, and I also understood at that point that I didn't really know enough about exactly the ecological functions that I was trying to understand. So I began to get fellowships. After quite a while, actually, I had been documenting and studying on my own, and the British government was paying for my work, and they said, that's enough. 10 years is enough. You have to give a scientific lecture. And I dropped out of college to be a television cameraman, so it was kind of odd to think, okay, I'm going to give a science lecture at a freshwater conference that was with many of the top scientists in the world. But I did that, and when I did that, it had kind of an effect. There were 2 types of people in the audience that were quite affected. The first were the heads of research institutes, so I got lots of invitations to go study, and the other were the youngest students who said, well, that's what we want to do. So after that, I was launched in this way. I went to 4 years at Reading. I was at the Rothamsted International Fellow for the Communication of Science for a number of years, and I was sent to Africa and was able to communicate about what I'd seen in China to Rwanda and Ethiopia especially, and also to the Global Environment Facility and Terra Africa and a number of other important organizations. That was already 15 years ago. So then I gave a very important lecture in Sweden at the Tallberg Forum. I had also presented at the Royal Society in London and the Royal Academy in Stockholm. And when I gave this lecture at the Tallberg Forum, the audience was the Undersecretary General of the United Nations, the head of the European Environment Agency, the chairman of International Union for the Conservation of Nature, etc. And at that time, that was the same time that Johan Rockström had written about the planetary boundaries, but it hadn't been published yet. And I had been working for about 15 years already on restoration when I gave that speech, and a man in the audience came up and he said, "We have to work together for the rest of our lives." This was Willem Farida, who at that time was the country director for the International Union for the Conservation of Nature in the Netherlands. And he said this, and I said, "Okay, but it's not long enough." Then we started to work together. And so he said, "What do you need?" And that was just June of 2009. And I knew that the Copenhagen COP15 was going to be, they were touting it as a big deal, and they were going to have all the leaders of the world were going to appear, and there's going to be some kind of agreement. And I looked at the situation, and I knew all these people from all the 15 years of work that I'd been doing. And I said, they're not going to have an agreement because they don't even know what's going on. They're talking about carbon disequilibrium in the atmosphere, and they want to build machines to hoover up the carbon and put it in a hole in the ground. And actually, we have a photoreactive biochemical process which has already created, constantly filtered, and continuously renewed the atmosphere, the freshwater system, the fertile soils, and it's because of the amazing biodiversity on the earth that we have an oxygenated atmosphere and all these other wonderful things. So how could we imagine that we're going to dig up some minerals and fashion some machines at the planetary scale to suck carbon out of it? It's ridiculous. So I said, I need to make a statement at the time of Copenhagen. And he said, all right, I'll help you. And he raised about $550,000. And I made a film called Hope in a Changing Climate. I had to sell my house in America because it cost $650,000. But it's okay because it landed on the BBC. BBC gave me half an hour to broadcast it, and it broadcast one day before the Copenhagen COP15. It was shown at the COP15 a number of times, and it basically woke everybody up to the idea that it's possible to rehabilitate large-scale damaged ecosystems. So this took me there. I haven't answered your question about the 55 camps, because then I spent another 3 years as senior research fellow for the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, and had a research professorship at George Mason University in Washington. And then Willem Farida stopped being the director of the IUCN in the Netherlands and created the Commonland Foundation. So when he created the Commonland Foundation, he asked me to become the ambassador, ecosystem ambassador for the Commonland Foundation. And during this time, in the last 10 years, Commonland has now created 4 large core research areas for restoration with about 2 million hectares in restoration. They're in the Netherlands, in Spain, South Africa, and Australia. And they're also advising to, and have already designed a restoration project or program for Haiti with the Red Cross, and advising in India and in Australia with Aborigine and Native communities, and in Colombia and some other places. That's going very well. As that went on, I started to realize, okay, the primary thought of this is to use large landowners and high wealth individuals and family fortunes to restore aggregated landscapes. And I thought, that's a good idea. That's a wonderful idea. But there's a whole lot of other people around the world who are not really fitting into that category. And what could we do for them? And then I started having dreams about people going camping and working together and eating together and being kind to one another and having multiple generations. And I thought, that's ridiculous. I've been making these films and writing extensively and broadcasting about this, and I don't think anybody's really listening. But I had this dream over and over and over. I would wake up and I thought I was going to have a kind of situation like Groundhog Day where, I'm always having this dream. And so I wrote it down in an essay, which was published in Permaculture magazine. It's called Earth Restoration Peace Camps. When that came out, tens of thousands of people started to say, we want that. When that happened, then we said, well, how would we do this? That's a nice thought, but how would we do that? Would we go to the rich people and ask them, please give us some money so we can do this? Or would we just share and do it? So we said, well, why don't we try the share thing? And we said if everybody would share 10 euros per month, that would be 120 euros per year. And when 1,000 people pledged to give 10 euros per month, then we said, well, we're going to have to create a foundation. So we created the first foundation that's in the EU. Now we have a second one in the United States. And we built the first camp, and we put it together with one of the Commonland projects because it's not going anywhere. They're well funded and are set up. So one of the farmers there said, well, you can have this 5 hectares and try it. So we tried it. And the first year we had one camp. And the second year we had a second camp in Mexico. But that one had already had $2 million of investment from the Organic Consumer Association. It's called Via Organica. It's a beautiful organic farm and training center, and it has a restaurant and a store, so it's fully operational immediately. And then the third year there were 21 camps. The fourth year there were 37 camps, and the fifth year there were 50 camps, and now there are more than 55, and there could be thousands if we have the ability to support this kind of work.
That's a very fascinating route. It's like one thing leads to another, and it's interesting because here we are in Montreal at COP15, and the COP15 was Copenhagen COP. This is a slightly different stream for the UN, which is a conference on biodiversity, but they're calling it COP15. Yeah, Copenhagen, there was a Copenhagen diagnosis or something. There was a number of scientific reports that came out or were prepared for Copenhagen that were talking about how, that was when people started to realize how dire climate change really was. And of course, climate change has been accelerating ever since, at faster and faster rates. We're at the highest greenhouse gas levels ever in the atmosphere right now. So one of the questions, are there any restoration camps, say, on small, are most of them within continents, or are there many of them on coastlines or small islands? And, would any consideration, is there any work going towards marine restoration at all?
Well, again, you're asking a number of questions in one. Each camp is self-organizing, self-governing, and autonomous. So the camps are deciding what they're doing, and they're choosing what they're doing based on what's happening to them locally. But they're all connected in a mycelial network around the world, so that if there are breakthroughs in any place, they can go around the world. And there's also a movement to include communities, to make it different than just camps, and have ecosystem restoration camps and communities. It's interesting that what has happened is that we have camps of all sizes and types. There's one in Egypt which I was just at, called Sekim. It's a community, it's an anthroposophic community that started 45 years ago. Has thousands of people working, and it's astonishing what they've been able to do in the desert. Then we have another camp in Egypt, which is in the South Sinai, called Habiba Camp, and that is working with almost 100 Bedouin families to teach them how to do regenerative agriculture. They're not really agricultural, they've been herders, but the devastation in the desertification of the South Sinai and of the northern Sinai is so intense that it's really difficult to imagine them continuing to do the types of things that they've been doing, which have caused the damage. So they're learning about what is fertile soils, how do you hold moisture in the lower atmosphere, how do you create a canopy, how do you lower surface temperatures, all of these things. This, I think, is so powerful. And you ask about coastal regions, we have camps which are working on mangrove restoration in Kenya and Southeast Asia. We have bamboo regeneration in trying to restore areas that have been devastated by palm oil plantations. And there's a urban camp in Hollywood. The first urban camp is in Hollywood, called the Birdhouse. And it's just wonderful. They are doing gray water treatment and diversion of gray water, and they've built giant microclimates. They're even doing restoration of public lands when they are given the opportunity. And they have several satellite programs that are connected to it. One is the Hollywood Orchard, where the fruit trees, when they come into fruit, in the backyards of the movie stars and the directors, for them it's a bit of a problem. They can't eat all the fruit, and they're not likely to go out there and pick it themselves. So they have the Hollywood Orchard, and the Hollywood Orchard people just go and pick all the fruit for the people who say, and they give whatever fruit they want to have, but they just want a few. They don't want it all. And so the rest of it goes to food pantries, or like the downtown women's shelter, or to other parts of LA. And then they have the Soil Sponge Network, which is growing out of there, where they're like anybody who says we want our front yard or backyard or side yard or all of our yards to be turned into soil sponges. They just show up with 20, 30 people, a couple of trucks of compost and mulch and some seeds and plants, and they turn them into beautiful soil sponges. And that ultimately, if you do that everywhere in LA, will of course turn it back into a wetland, which it was originally. The first camp in the United States was at Paradise, California, where the fire killed 85 people. And I got a call. I'd just been in California, in San Francisco, at speaking there, and I'd gone back to Europe. I was in the Netherlands, and I was in the Commonland office when I got this WhatsApp recording, and a young man was fleeing in his car and recording to me, John, Paradise is lost. You must come back. And his wheels were smoking on fire, and he was rushing through the roads to get out of there. And he couldn't get back to get his daughter. Fortunately, his friends picked up both their kids and took the daughter out, so they were okay. But 85 people died. And he said, you have to come back right away. So I came back, went to California, and I went to Paradise, and it was just heartbreaking to see the people, and they were so deflated. And then I showed them what was possible in terms of restoration of degraded lands. And then we said, well, we have this movement for creating ecosystem restoration camps. Would anyone like to have an ecosystem restoration camp? It was like unanimous. So that was important. I spent 5 months on Mount Shasta living in a tent in 2020 in the summer, and that camp now has been destroyed by fire. And the people at that camp are more dedicated to restoration now than they were before, and they were already kind of fanatical. We have a camp in Kentucky that's near the town of Lovely, which is where Lyndon Johnson announced the war on poverty. And they're dealing with mountaintop removal. They're dealing with massive addiction rates and extreme poverty. And now, because of the mountaintop removal, their streams and hydrology's disrupted, mass deforestation. And yet, the potential for restoration there is tremendous. So just by organizing and getting people to do this, then we can have an impact. And when I come to places like this, and I think about all the people, all the money which is being spent, all the people who are talking, they just need to stop doing this and work. And so what we're seeing is that this is not a theoretical or rhetorical problem. This is mass disruptions to Earth systems on a planetary scale. So we have to work locally, but simultaneously this has to happen all over the world. So that's what the movement is about.
Now, we know there's some sayings like nature has a way, give nature a chance and it will recover. I mean, we can look at some areas of the world. A couple that come to mind are the regions around Chernobyl that were basically abandoned by humans, and forests have grown back and plants are growing inside buildings. And, it doesn't take long for nature to sort of take hold. There's lots of wildlife and so on, and the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea, an area where humans can't go, and now it's a flourishing wildlife region. So without human intervention, if you just leave a space alone, nature comes back eventually. But I think what you're showing and saying is that with smart human intervention, we can really work with nature to restore things much, much faster than they would do on their own. I mean, would that be a fair assessment, or?
Well, I'm not exactly sure that is completely accurate. Like, what I have seen is that in the cradles of civilization, so in the Lus Plateau, in the Fertile Crescent between the Tigris and the Euphrates, in these types of areas, in ancient civilizations, you find a kind of massive degradation, which you can understand if you use, I would call it, ecological forensics. What happened here? And, well, they cut the trees. When the trees were gone, well, the canopy had interrupted the solar radiation, and the solar radiation didn't directly hit the ground. And so if you measure the temperatures in a canopy, especially in a climax canopy, and the temperatures on the surface of the Earth when the canopy is destroyed and lost, well, you're going to find 15 to 20 degrees differences. And I have found as high as 45 degrees temperature differentials. Now that's an Celsius. That's an outlier, but that is in the desert in Xinjiang in northwest China. Taklamakan, the name Taklamakan means you go in but you don't come out. So, this is like a clue, like this is bad news. Second largest shifting sand desert. And the Chinese built a vegetative shelter belt through the middle of the Taklamakan. Now, the fact that you can do that is just unbelievable. I'm not sure, from my experience and what I understand, that's not what I would choose to do first. But the fact that you can do that tells us that many of the things that we need to do can be done. We need to be aware of this and then consider what we're going to do. But I think we've been looking at it like here or in all these convening of the parties for the conventions. There are 4 major conventions. And one is the Convention for Biological Diversity, where we are. One is the Convention for Framework Convention on Climate Change, one's the Convention on Combating Desertification, and then there's the Ramsar Convention, which is about wetlands. And so all of these come out of the 1992 Earth Summit. And basically, there are people here who know all of this, and then there are a whole lot of people who know very little of this, and they just plugging in at this point, and then they're wandering around here. I mean, the first time you come to one of these things, it's like, what is going on? So it's not a policy issue problem. It's not a rhetorical problem. We have disruptions, physical disruptions to symbiotic systems. So we have multidimensional symbiotic systems around the world. So you can't really separate biodiversity from climate change or from soil or from food insecurity or from desertification. They're all basically the same thing. So this is where I think we need to go now. And I'm on a task force, finance task force, that's run by the World Bank for the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, which is kind of strategizing how to fund and what to fund in large-scale restoration. And I think in understanding that biodiversity loss, climate change, desertification, and food insecurity and hydrological disruptions, they're all the same problem, is to understand that there are probably almost 1 billion people now who are at high risk for food insecurity. Many are refugees and homeless. So something has happened which has caused them to have lost their basic human rights, their birthrights as human beings. And so what happened to them? And we know what happened to them. It's from domination. It's from genocide and slavery and mercantilism and debt-based economics, which is a sort of replacement for slavery by having people be indentured servants. If we understand that, and we also understand that we're facing existential threats from climate change, from biodiversity loss, from these other issues, then we have to understand that actually these people are the most vulnerable, and these people are the most available and capable of doing what needs to be done. If we teach them and train them and pay them to do ecosystem restoration, then they will help themselves. They will be able to feed themselves. They will have dignified and meaningful work. And we, the rest of the world, must realize that they have equal rights, and they must be given their sovereign rights and their land back. And the idea that somebody stole it in the past and now it's been sold back and forth to other people and it's not theirs anymore is just not a thing, because you can't say, I stole it and it's mine. How could that possibly be a legal argument? It's a ridiculous argument. And you can't now not notice that we have 8 billion people on the planet, and that if we're going to solve these things, we're really going to have to do it in a holistic way. We can't do this slowly, incrementally, with just a sort of transition toward something which is more fair or less bad. We're going to have to take on the subject and actually do it.
Yes, one of the things that is definitely clear in the scientific community is that people are way too specialized, and I think that is true throughout any profession in society. You know, we're a world of specialists when what we really need is to understand the systems that we're dealing with, as you've been emphasizing, the connection between all the different components. Then, you know, we need more people to look at the overall connections between the parts in the systems, and that's one of the things that I've been trying to do with the papers that I choose to discuss in my videos and that we talk about in the Climate Emergency Forum. So maybe you can just talk a little bit about what sort of things have you done to try to recruit scientists to get them involved in some of these eco restoration projects. And you've talked to many people around the world. So are you finding that there's more scientific help, or is that something that you still need a lot of? And I guess that leads to what sort of projects do you have? You've touched a bit about what future work you're hoping, what things you want to see happening. And I guess as far as the World Bank funding goes, I spoke to a gentleman at the World Bank at COP27 about possible funding for some of the projects like mere or ocean pasture restoration, and he said, well, they have to be billion-dollar projects or the World Bank is not really interested. So, if you're trying to get funding from the World Bank, don't ask for millions. Make sure that there's billions in those numbers, and they'll be more interested in funding that. What are your goals, say, in the next couple of years, say the next 5 years for your projects?
I have kind of come to a conclusion about myself that I'm more or less a serial creator. I have somehow magically been empowered. And as long as I don't want anything personally, I'm sort of unlimited. I can just do what I want. I would say that being empowered to understand, to observe, to document, to travel, to interact and have relationships with all these societies and cultures around the world, to understand these things and the amazing generosity and kindness of all the people have shown to me in doing this, this privilege is a responsibility. And this ability to be empowered seems to me to be the thing that I'm supposed to do, is empower other people. And I'm 70 years old. I'm not going to be carrying the heavy loads here. I'm lucky to be as healthy as I am at 70, but I don't really, and my mother is 103 and my father did pass away at 99, so I could be around for a little while. But however long we actually live, it's a moment in human history. And the sort of situation that we're at now is so critical and so complex and so difficult to imagine. I think a lot of people are stunned into inactivity by the idea that, well, I'm even going to think about that. How could I possibly do anything about this? And I don't know. I have spent my entire life at the edge of the front row of power, politics, and massive transformational change. So that's normal to me. Transformational change is like, well, that's definitely going to happen. So I wouldn't say that they're my projects. I would say that there are things which are going on, and that is a trend. And trend lines are important, and the direction that things are going is important. So the trend now, and what we see from the camps movement, is that this is not culturally specific. This works in every continent on the earth, and that everybody needs this and everybody wants this, and that these people are volunteering. They're choosing to do restoration. So those are the people I'm interested in. Those are the ones who are actually doing the work. So they're not the ones who are like discussing we're going to have to need billions and trillions, and where's that billions and trillions coming from, and where's it going? Is it going to the people who actually do the work? Or is it going to highly paid consultants who are in a vortex of, I don't know. Like, how long does it take you? 27, COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh? If you have an existential threat to human civilization or to life on Earth, does it take you 27 meetings to, have an understanding? I don't think so. So I would say that basically we have to restore all degraded lands on the Earth. That restoration needs to be the central intention for human civilization. And that means shifting our economy. First, let's talk about the economy. I think it has to be shifted away from extraction, manufacturing, buying and selling, consumption, to something of true value. So now shifting container loads of plastic gewgaws around the world is the basis of some sort of economy. It doesn't make any sense. because the oxygenated atmosphere, the fresh water system, the fertile soils, and the biodiversity are vastly more valuable than anything that human beings have ever made and everything that human beings will ever make. But in the GDP economy, they're zero. So this can't be true. So that means we have a fundamental error of judgment. We have an ignorant mistake in our economic thought. And that means we have terrible insecurity in human civilization. And that's what you see. And that's what people see and feel in their psychology, in the way they're acting. They're traumatized by everything that's happening because everything makes no sense. When you go into nature and you see a stream flowing and it's bubbling and it's clean and you can drink out of it, or you stand below the shade, or you see the leaves turning to capture solar radiation to do photosynthesis, and you smell the phenols that come from these living beings, and you realize that you're in symbiotic relationship with them, and that their life and the quality of their life determines your life and the quality of your life, well, you're in another space. You have another type of consciousness. And this is where human consciousness needs to go, not like what's the next movie on such and such, or, you know, what happened here and there, or who won the game. It doesn't matter. Those things don't matter. And like what's the bottom line in the existing economic system? Because actually it's not true. Whatever the bottom line is in this type of economic system, it isn't true. Because if you're degrading the life support systems of the earth, you're bankrupt from the word go. You know, and the more you do, the worse the situation becomes. So it isn't really true. So those people, the people who are going camping, I'll tell you, they get it. They look at that and they go, I'm going to go camping. Let's go. And they're going to have dinner a lot. And they're going to play volleyball, and they're going to go swimming in the natural swimming place, and they're going to spend 3 or 5 or 6 and if they're obsessive, 8 hours working in tree planting and regenerative agriculture, in soil creation, in botanical sanctuaries to protect the most endangered species on the planet. So let's do that. That's more valuable. And let's make that the basis of the economy. And let's tell the truth. These are the people who are reacting to the problem and who are actually doing something about it. And the people who are talking about it and flying to exotic locations to have another meeting are not. You have to think about this carefully, because this is where the media is. They got media rooms and all this. So in a way, you need to acknowledge that realpolitik. But on the other hand, the real work is being done in the Sinai Peninsula, or in Indonesia, or in India, or in Arizona, or in Brazil. And that has to happen worldwide.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, one of the, just to sort of conclude up here, and thanks to everybody for watching this Climate Emergency Forum video. One of the objectives that you hear from this conference, COP15, Conference on Biodiversity, is the term 30-30, which is the idea of protecting 30% of the, I guess it's of the Earth's surface, maybe it's of the land surface, I don't know, by 2030. And, I get the sort of bad feeling that that people are going to leave this conference and say, okay, we can trash the other 70%. Whereas the key thing to do is to make sure that if you have a degraded area, you want to restore it, make it able to capture carbon, have an ecosystem, etc. So, it's not that you just divide the world into 30% good zone and, a 70% do what you want zone. So this is a sort of, I don't think people really get it that much. I mean, you can take it sounds to me from your work is actually shown that you can take any degraded area and you can provide some amount of restoration to that area. And it doesn't have to be large scale. I mean, we hear stories of like a single person in India planting a whole forest and individual people doing some amazing things. So once again, thank you very much, John. This has been a fascinating session. So I'm going to pass it over to you for some concluding ideas and thoughts.
I would just say we should have 100% now. So like, let's just do 100% now. That is the way forward if we really want to succeed. I'm also grateful for all the people who are watching and for this opportunity to have, I do have a lot on my mind lately. And I would say that the biggest project that we're working on is in the Sinai Peninsula right now. And it was signed on the first day at the COP27 MOU with the Egyptian government. And it's been developed over 6 years and with a group called the Weathermakers. And you can read about it in an essay I wrote for Cosmos Journal called The Holy Grail of Restoration. And that shows exactly the scale and the type of impacts that could happen if we were to take this seriously. I think we have to be a little skeptical about geoengineering if you throw it out as a meme. But I think if you do restoration of ecological function over large scale, it will have very, very good results. That's what I've seen in the Lys Plateau, and I've seen that everywhere else where we try it.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and thank you for watching this video and for supporting the Climate Emergency Forum work to try to get these important messages out to the general public. So please share this video, and please click and like it and subscribe to the Climate Emergency Forum channel. Thank you.